The first thing I saw wasn't my father's face. It was the folder. A plain blue folder sitting in the middle of the oak conference table, with my family's lawyer sliding it toward me as if he were offering dessert instead of detonating my entire life. "I just need your signature acknowledging you've been informed," he said quietly. I looked at him, confused. Informed about what? No one answered. Not my father. Not my mother. Not my younger sister, Vanessa, who suddenly found the pattern in the carpet fascinating. The silence lasted so long that I finally reached for the papers myself. I wish I hadn't. The first line blurred before my eyes. Transfer of ownership. The second line hit even harder. Marshall Family Hardware and Supply shall be transferred in its entirety to Vanessa Marshall. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to process what I was reading. This is a joke. Nobody smiled. I flipped through the pages faster. Every deed, every inventory record, every banking authorization, everything. The store I'd opened every morning for 22 years, the business I'd practically lived inside, the place where I knew every regular customer by name. It all belonged to my sister now. I looked at Dad. "You signed this." He folded his hands together. We all agreed it was the right decision. Mom finally spoke. "It's for the future, Emily." I stared at her. "The future?" Vanessa finally cleared her throat. "I didn't ask for this." That sentence alone nearly made me throw the folder across the room. "You didn't." She looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Dad thought it would modernize the business." I laughed again, louder this time. "You've been inside the store 6 times in the last 10 years. I have ideas. You don't know where we keep the extension cords." Dad slammed his palm against the table. "Enough." The room fell silent. He looked directly at me. "You've always been a hard worker, Emily. Whenever someone starts a sentence that way, something terrible is coming next. But hard work isn't enough anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means Vanessa understands modern business." I blinked. "I'm sorry." I leaned forward because I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. "The woman who quit 4 different jobs in 3 years understands business better than the person who's been running yours for over 2 decades. Mom sighed dramatically. "That's unfair." "No," I said quietly. "What's unfair is pretending this decision has anything to do with business." Nobody looked at me. That's when I knew. This had been planned for months, maybe longer, and I was the last person to find out. Marshall Family Hardware wasn't just a store. It was my childhood. My grandfather opened it in 1968. My father inherited it in the late 80s. By the time I was 12, I was stocking shelves after school. At 16, I knew every supplier. At 19, I delayed college because Dad said he needed help for a year. 1 year became 5. 5 became 10. Then 22. I never complained. Not once. When Dad had his first heart attack, I ran the business alone for 6 months. When Mom broke her hip, I worked mornings at the store and spent evenings taking care of her. When COVID nearly destroyed small businesses, I negotiated with suppliers, started online orders, organized curbside pickup, and somehow kept every employee on payroll. We survived. Barely, but we survived. Everyone in town praised my father. George saved the business. Dad never corrected them. He never said it had actually been me. I told myself it didn't matter. Family isn't about recognition. Family is about loyalty. Turns out, loyalty only mattered when they expected it from me. After the meeting, I drove straight to the store. I didn't know why. Habit, maybe. The parking lot looked exactly the same. Mr. Henderson loading birdseed into his pickup. Mrs. Alvarez comparing paint samples. Kids buying baseball gloves before practice. Life kept moving. Like mine hadn't just exploded. The automatic doors opened with a familiar little chime. "Morning, Emily." Kevin waved from plumbing. "You okay?" I realized I'd been standing there without moving. "Yeah." I forced a smile. "Long meeting." He frowned. "You look pale." "I'm fine." I wasn't. Not even close. I walked the aisle slowly. Every shelf held a memory. That ladder display. I'd built it. The gardening section. My redesign doubled spring sales. The power tool wall. 3 weeks of planning. Every improvement. Every expansion. Every display. Mine. I reached my office. Well, I thought it was my office. The nameplate had already been removed. I stared at the empty space on the door. Someone had done it while I was at the lawyer's office. That meant they'd expected me to come back. To notice. To understand. Inside, half the shelves were already empty. Family photos. Awards. Employee appreciation plaques. Gone. There was a cardboard box sitting on the desk. My things. 22 years reduced to one box. I picked up the framed picture from our 20th anniversary celebration. The entire staff stood together outside the store. Everyone smiling. Dad had his arm around my shoulder. The plaque underneath read, "Thank you for 20 years of dedication." I laughed bitterly. Apparently the warranty on gratitude expired after 2 years. Vanessa arrived 30 minutes later, driving a brand new white SUV. She walked into my office carrying 2 expensive coffees. "Can we talk? I don't think we have anything left to say." She set one coffee down anyway. "You always liked caramel." "I still do." Silence. Finally she spoke. "I know you're angry. You think. I told Dad this wasn't the right way." I looked at her. "But you still accepted the store." She hesitated. "Yes." "Why?" She actually smiled. Not smugly. Hopefully. "Because I think I can make it amazing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Amazing. The business is stuck in the past. It's profitable. It could be more profitable. Based on what experience? I have an MBA. There it is. She crossed her arms. "You've always looked down on my education." I look down on people who think a classroom teaches more than 22 years of doing the job. Her expression hardened. This attitude is exactly why Dad made his decision. What attitude? You refuse to evolve. I actually laughed. I built the website. She blinked. I started online ordering. Silence. I negotiated every supplier contract. She looked confused. I created our social media. Her confidence visibly shrank. "You did? Dad never told you?" She didn't answer. Interesting. Maybe she didn't know as much as she claimed. The employees found out before closing. Dad gathered everyone near the registers. "I have an announcement." The mood immediately changed. Employees exchanged worried glances. Dad smiled proudly. "Effective immediately, Vanessa will become owner and CEO of Marshall Hardware." Dead silence. Then Kevin raised his hand. "What about Emily?" Dad answered before I could. "Emily has decided to step away." I stared at him. I didn't decide anything. Everyone looked between us. Dad's smile disappeared. "This isn't the time." "No." I stepped forward. "Actually, this is exactly the time." The entire store froze. Customers even stopped shopping. I've worked here 22 years. I looked at every employee. "You deserve the truth." Dad whispered sharply. "Emily." I ignored him. I was informed this morning that ownership had already been transferred without my knowledge. Kevin's face went white. Sarah from customer service covered her mouth. Mike muttered, "No way." Dad's voice became ice cold. "This conversation is over." "No," I said calmly. "It's just beginning." I looked at Vanessa. "When were you going to tell everyone?" She swallowed. "We were waiting until Monday. So they could think I quit." Nobody spoke. Because everyone understood exactly what had happened. They weren't just replacing me. They were rewriting history. That night, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Employees, customers, old suppliers. Word spread faster than I imagined. Around 9 o'clock, Kevin called again. "Emily!" His voice sounded nervous. "What happened?" I sighed. "I honestly don't know." "No." He interrupted. "I mean, what really happened? What do you mean?" He lowered his voice. "George had us cleaning out your office yesterday." My stomach dropped. "Yesterday?" "Yeah." "So?" I struggled to breathe. "They already knew?" "We thought you did." I sat down slowly. "Yesterday." That meant when Dad hugged me after work. When Mom asked me to come to Sunday's family dinner. When Vanessa texted asking if we should get lunch next week. They already knew they were taking everything. Every smile. Every conversation. Every hug. It had all been a performance. Sleep never came. Instead, I found myself driving through town just before sunrise. Without thinking, I ended up in the store parking lot. Old habits. The lights were still off. Normally I'd already be inside making coffee before the opening crew arrived. Instead, I sat in my truck, watching someone else unlock the building. Vanessa. She fumbled with the keys for nearly a minute. Wrong key. Wrong lock. Wrong key again. Finally the door opened. She disappeared inside. I almost laughed. 22 years. And she couldn't even open the front door without struggling. I should have driven away. Instead, I watched. Because despite everything, some stubborn part of me still loved that building. Still worried about it. Still wanted it to succeed. Even if it no longer belonged to me. Then something happened that made every hair on my arm stand up. A delivery truck pulled into the loading dock. Our biggest supplier. The driver climbed out, looked around in confusion, then called someone on his phone. A few seconds later, he climbed back into the truck and drove away. He never unloaded a single box. At the time, I had no idea that one missed delivery would be the first domino. Within weeks, everything my family believed about business and about me would come crashing down. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't just destroy the store. It would expose a secret my father had buried for more than 20 years. The delivery truck disappearing from the loading dock should have made me smile. It didn't. Instead, it left a knot in my stomach. I knew that truck. It belonged to Benton Industrial Supply, the company that delivered nearly 60% of our fast-moving inventory. Screws, plumbing fittings, electrical wire, paint accessories, everything contractors bought every single day. If they drove away without unloading, something was very wrong. I sat there gripping the steering wheel. For one reckless second, I almost got out and walked over. I almost fixed it. That was the problem. For 22 years, fixing everyone else's mistakes had become instinct. But this wasn't my store anymore. I started the truck and drove away. By 10 that morning, I had already received 6 phone calls. Not from family. From customers. Emily. It was Frank Lawson. He'd owned Lawson Construction for as long as I could remember. You taking a vacation? No. There was an awkward pause. They're saying you're gone. I am. Silence. Huh. He let out a slow breath. That's a mistake. My throat tightened. I appreciate that. No, I mean it's literally a business mistake. I couldn't help smiling. Frank had never wasted words. I went in this morning. And they couldn't find the anchors I ordered. They're in aisle 9. I know that. His voice grew sharper. I told the new owner. I already knew where this was going. What happened? She told me they weren't. I closed my eyes. They're behind the concrete mix display. Exactly. Another pause. I walked back there myself. And they were exactly where you said. He sighed. Kid looked embarrassed. Kid. He'd called my 36-year-old sister a kid. I'm sorry. You don't owe me an apology. His voice softened. You built that place. Before hanging up, he said something that stayed with me for weeks. Buildings don't make businesses, Emily. People do. 3 days later, Kevin showed up at my house. He looked exhausted. You look terrible, I said. I feel worse. He accepted a cup of coffee and stared into it for a long moment. I probably shouldn't be here. So why are you? He laughed without humor. Because somebody has to tell you what's happening. I didn't interrupt. He leaned forward. Vanessa changed everything. Already. In 3 days. He started counting on his fingers. She rearranged the plumbing department because she wanted better customer flow. I frowned. The contractors won't find anything. They can't. What else? She removed the handwritten inventory notes. I nearly choked. The notes I made, they looked unprofessional. Those notes had taken years to build. Every shelf had little reminders. Order every Thursday. Keep extra during winter. Mr. Dawson gets contractor pricing. Tiny details that weren't in any computer. Details that kept the business running smoothly. What about suppliers? Kevin looked away. She canceled breakfast with Benton. My stomach dropped. What? She said business lunches are outdated. I put my coffee down. Every first Friday, I'd met Jim Benton at the diner across the street. Not because we needed breakfast. Because relationships mattered. When lumber prices jumped, Jim warned me early. When inventory ran short, he made sure we got priority. When COVID hit, he extended payment terms because he trusted me. Not the store. Me. Vanessa had thrown all of that away in 3 days. I don't understand, I whispered. Kevin hesitated. I think she believes relationships are old-fashioned. What does she believe in? Data. I couldn't help laughing. Data doesn't answer the phone at midnight. What? When a snowstorm delays deliveries. He stared at me. Data doesn't rush emergency stock because your customer has 20 employees waiting. He nodded slowly. Data doesn't remember your daughter's graduation. Kevin smiled. You always remembered. Because people remember how you make them feel. He stood to leave. At the door, he stopped. You know what everyone's saying. What? They're waiting. For what? For you. A week passed. I refused to drive by the store. Instead, I painted my kitchen, organized closets, pulled weeds I'd ignored for years. Anything to stay busy. Then my phone rang again. Unknown number. Hello. A woman's voice answered. Emily. Yes. This is Diane from Benton Industrial. I sat up. Hi, Diane. I hope this isn't inappropriate. What? We've been trying to reach someone. My pulse quickened. The store. Yes. And? No one's returning calls. What happened? She sighed. We suspended deliveries. I wasn't surprised. Still, hearing it hurt. Because of payment? No. That caught me off guard. Then why? She lowered her voice. The new owner informed us she was seeking other suppliers. What? She said your prices weren't competitive. I rubbed my forehead. They've been with us for 34 years. I know. Another pause. We matched every quote she brought. My heart sank. And? She still said no. Why? Diane's answer stunned me. She said loyalty is bad business. The words echoed in my head all afternoon. Loyalty is bad business. Maybe on a spreadsheet. Not in a small town. In Brookhaven, people didn't just buy hammers. They bought from people they trusted. By Friday afternoon, rumors were everywhere. The diner buzzed with conversations. The barber shop, church parking lot, even the post office. Everyone had heard about Marshall Hardware. Everyone had an opinion. Most of them weren't flattering. That Saturday, I ran into Mrs. Alvarez at the farmer's market. She hugged me before saying a word. I miss you. I've only been gone a week. It feels longer. She looked around before lowering her voice. I went in yesterday, and I couldn't find fertilizer. It moved. Everything moved. She sighed dramatically. The poor young man working there couldn't help me. Kevin. No. We hired someone. She nodded. He kept checking his phone. I smiled sadly. That meant Kevin wasn't in Garden anymore. She continued. I finally left. You didn't buy anything. I drove 25 minutes to Carter's Hardware. That sentence landed like a brick. People rarely left town for hardware. Convenience was everything. Once customers formed new habits, getting them back became nearly impossible. Monday morning, my father called. For the first time since the meeting. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hello. His voice sounded strangely cheerful. How are you? I stared at the phone. You signed my life's work away. I know you're upset. Upset? I called because your mother misses you. I laughed. Does she miss me? Emily. No. I interrupted. Does she miss me? Or the fact that I stopped coming over every Sunday? Silence. Finally he said, We're still family. I took a slow breath. Family doesn't ambush each other in lawyers' offices. He sighed heavily. Vanessa's under a lot of pressure. There it was. Not, how are you? Not, are you okay? Instead, please make this easier for your sister. What do you want? I was hoping you'd come by the store. I froze. Why? She has questions. I laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. You want me? Another laugh escaped. To train the woman you replaced me with? It would help everyone. No. Emily. No. Then I hung up. My hands were shaking. Not from anger anymore. From clarity. For the first time, I understood something. My family didn't think they betrayed me. They thought I'd overreacted. 2 days later, the town newspaper published an article. Marshall Hardware announces new leadership. There was a smiling photo of Vanessa standing in front of the store. The quote underneath made my blood boil. We're bringing fresh ideas and modern business practices while honoring our family's legacy. Not one mention of me. Not one. 22 years erased in one paragraph. That afternoon, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, I nearly cried. Frank Lawson stood there. Behind him were 8 contractors. Every one of them had been customers for years. Frank held a cardboard box. "I think this belongs to you." Inside were my old notebooks, the inventory journals, supplier contacts, customer measurements, everything I'd written by hand over 2 decades. "How?" "Kevin." "Of course." He said they were throwing them away. I stared at the box. Throwing them away. 22 years of handwritten knowledge. Frank smiled gently. "Didn't seem right." One by one, the contractor spoke. "You always took care of us. You opened early when we needed supplies. You stayed late. You never treated us like a number." My eyes filled with tears. Then Frank said something unexpected. "What are you going to do now?" "I honestly don't know." He looked around at the others. "I think you should." "What?" "Open another store." I laughed immediately. "With what money?" "We'll buy from you." "It isn't that simple." "No." He nodded. "It isn't." Then he smiled. "But you've already got the hard part." "I do." "You." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward everyone standing behind him. "Trust." That night, I couldn't sleep again. Not because I was angry. Because for the first time, hope had entered the room. Tiny, fragile, dangerous. I walked into my garage, opened the box of notebooks, started flipping through 22 years of memories. Supplier numbers, customer birthdays, special orders, mistakes I'd learned from, ideas I'd never had time to try. On the last page of the final notebook, I found something I'd completely forgotten. A business plan, written 15 years earlier. At the top I'd scribbled a title, "If I ever own my own store." I sat there staring at those words. Then I heard my father's voice in my head. Hard work isn't enough anymore. Maybe he was right. Maybe hard work wasn't enough. Maybe it was finally time to stop building someone else's legacy and start building my own. I had no idea that by making that decision, I was about to uncover the one document my father had spent more than 20 years making sure I would never see. The next morning, I drove to the bank with a notebook, a folder full of old financial records, and absolutely no confidence that anyone would take me seriously. I wasn't wearing my work boots. I wasn't covered in sawdust. I felt like an imposter. For 22 years, I'd run a business that legally wasn't mine. Now I had to convince someone I could build one from scratch. As I sat in the parking lot, I almost turned around. Then my phone buzzed. It was Kevin. 3 more employees quit this morning. I stared at the message. A second one appeared. "Don't let what happened stop you." That was all I needed. The loan officer introduced herself as Karen Ellis. She couldn't have been more than 50, with silver-framed glasses and the kind of calm smile that instantly put people at ease. "So," she said, opening my file, "tell me about your business experience." I laughed softly. "How much time do you have?" She smiled. "I've got an hour." By the time I finished, almost 90 minutes had passed. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't complain about my family. I simply explained how I'd increased revenue, reduced waste, negotiated supplier contracts, survived recessions, handled staffing shortages, and kept a small-town hardware store alive through one of the hardest economic periods in decades. Karen leaned back in her chair. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why isn't your name on any of these ownership records?" There it was. The question I'd been asking myself for years. My father always said we'd take care of the paperwork later. She nodded slowly. "And later never came." "No." She closed the folder. "I've been doing commercial lending for 27 years. I waited. I've met dozens of people who inherited businesses." Another pause. "I've met very few who actually built them." A week later, I found an empty building on the edge of town. It had once been an auto parts store. The roof leaked. The paint was faded. Half the lights didn't work. Most people would have seen a disaster. I saw possibilities. The first person I called wasn't a contractor. It was Frank Lawson. He arrived with 2 pickup trucks and 6 members of his crew. "You weren't kidding," I said. He grinned. "I told you we'd help." By lunchtime, more people had shown up. Mrs. Alvarez brought homemade tamales. The owner of the diner sent coffee. A retired electrician volunteered to fix the wiring. Even teenagers from the local high school spent their Saturdays scraping old paint off the walls. No one asked how much they would be paid. Most refused payment altogether. Standing in the middle of that dusty building, I realized something that made my chest tighten. For 22 years, I believed I was indispensable to my family's business. I had been wrong. I wasn't indispensable to the building. I mattered to the people, and they had followed me. Meanwhile, Marshall Hardware wasn't doing well. I didn't hear it from gossip. I heard it from suppliers. Jim Benton called me one evening. I know this isn't really my place. What happened? They've switched suppliers 3 times. In a month. Trying to save money. And they're buying cheaper inventory. I closed my eyes. That explained everything. Cheap screw strip. Cheap paint peels. Cheap plumbing fittings leak. Customers notice. Especially contractors. They're also 30 days behind on invoices. That surprised me. Already. Jim sighed. They're discounting everything. Trying to increase sales? No. He sounded almost sad. They're trying to increase cash flow. Those weren't the same thing. Not even close. 3 weeks after leaving the family store, I finally saw my sister again. It happened at the grocery store. Neither of us expected it. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair tied back carelessly. She barely resembled the confident woman who'd stood in front of the newspaper camera. She noticed me and froze. For a second, I considered walking away. Instead, I smiled politely. Hi, Emily. She looked around nervously. Can we talk? I almost said no. Instead, I nodded toward the coffee shop next door. 5 minutes later, we were sitting across from each other. Neither of us touched our drinks. She looked at me for a long time before speaking. I owe you an apology. I stayed quiet. I thought. She laughed bitterly. I honestly thought running the store would be easy. I didn't say I told you so. There wasn't any point. She continued. Dad made it sound like you were just maintaining things. The word stung more than I expected. Maintaining. He said the systems were already in place. I looked out the window. The systems were people. She frowned. I didn't understand that. No. You did. Another long silence settled between us. Finally she whispered, I've made a terrible mistake. I looked directly at her. What exactly are you apologizing for? She hesitated. Taking the store. No. She looked confused. You're apologizing because it's harder than you expected. She flinched. If business were booming. I continued quietly. Would you be sitting here? She couldn't answer. That was answer enough. Before leaving, she reached into her purse. I found something. She slid an old envelope across the table. It was in Dad's filing cabinet. There was no name on it. Only one word. Emily. I didn't open it. I stared at it. When did you find this? Yesterday. Why give it to me? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I think it belongs to you. I waited until I got home before opening it. Inside was a folded letter. The handwriting stopped me cold. My grandfather's. He died 23 years earlier. With trembling hands, I unfolded the paper. Emily, if you're reading this, then something has happened that I hoped never would. My heart started pounding. You've loved this store since you were a little girl. Long before anyone asked you to work here, you chose to. That kind of devotion cannot be taught. Tears blurred the words. I've watched your father closely. He loves this family, but he has one weakness. He mistakes obligation for loyalty. He believes the oldest child should carry the heaviest burden without complaint. I stopped breathing. If one day you discover that your sacrifices were taken for granted, remember this. The store was never your greatest achievement. You were. A tear landed on the page. Then I reached the final paragraph. The paragraph that changed everything. There is something your father has never known. I changed my will 6 months before I died. A copy was given to my attorney, Harold Whitmore. If the store is ever sold or transferred outside the hands of the person actively operating it, that will become important. I read it again and again. Then one last line. Harold promised he would know when the time came. I didn't sleep. At 8 the next morning, I searched for Harold Whitmore's office. The receptionist smiled sadly when I gave his name. I'm sorry. My stomach dropped. He passed away 5 years ago. The hope I'd felt disappeared instantly. I'm trying to locate his files. She nodded. They were transferred. To who? She handed me a business card. Carter and Lewis Attorneys at Law. I thanked her and drove there immediately. A young attorney named Daniel Carter greeted me. When I explained why I was there, his expression changed. Would you wait here for a moment? He disappeared into the records room. 10 minutes. 20. 30. Finally he returned carrying a thick, dust-covered file. He placed it on the table. I've been wondering if someone would eventually come asking about this. I stared at him. You knew. I knew there was a sealed instruction. He carefully opened the file. There are documents here that were never meant to be released. He looked directly at me. Unless ownership of Marshall Hardware changed under specific circumstances. My pulse thundered in my ears. What circumstances? He took a slow breath. If the business was transferred to anyone other than the family member who had been actively managing daily operations for at least 5 consecutive years. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He continued. According to your grandfather. He turned another page. That person was you. The room went completely silent. Then Daniel looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Emily. He paused. I think your grandfather knew this day might come. He reached for one final sealed envelope. This, he said quietly, contains instructions that your father has probably prayed would never be opened. Daniel placed the sealed envelope between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The paper had yellowed with age, and the wax seal bore my grandfather's initials. T.M. Thomas Marshall, the man who taught me how to tell the difference between oak and maple just by looking at the grain. The man who used to say, a person's word is worth more than any contract, but write the contract anyway. I suddenly understood why. Whenever you're ready, Daniel said gently. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was another letter. Emily, if this letter has been opened, then your father ignored my final advice. That saddens me, but it doesn't surprise me. I swallowed hard. I built Marshall Hardware for this town, not for pride, not for status, and certainly not so family members could inherit a title they didn't earn. Daniel quietly slid another document beside the letter. It was a copy of my grandfather's amended will. A highlighted paragraph caught my eye. Should ownership ever be transferred away from the family member who has actively managed the business without that person's written consent, the property located at 417 West Pine Street shall immediately pass into the Family Preservation Trust under the supervision of the trustee. I looked up. What does that mean? Daniel folded his hands. It means your grandfather separated the business from the property. I don't understand. Your father owned the company. He tapped the document. But the land, the building, the parking lot, another pause, were never fully his. I stared at him. They belong to the trust. And who's the trustee? Daniel smiled faintly. Until this morning, he said, it was our firm. I felt my heartbeat quicken. And now, he slid one final page toward me. The successor trustee. My name, Emily Marshall. I couldn't speak. For nearly a full minute, Daniel explained everything. 23 years earlier, my grandfather had quietly changed his estate plan. He'd seen the way my father treated me. He'd noticed who was actually opening the store every morning, who knew every employee, who stayed after closing, who loved the place. He hadn't trusted ownership alone, so he created a safeguard. If the store was ever handed to someone other than the person actually running it, the trust had the legal right to terminate the building lease. Not immediately, but after proper notice. Has that ever happened? I asked. Daniel smiled. Never. So what happens now? We notify your father. And then, he has 90 days. 90 days for what? To negotiate with the trust. I leaned back. The irony was almost unbelievable. They'd given away the business, without realizing they no longer controlled the building it operated from. 3 days later, my father called. This time, he wasn't cheerful. Emily. His voice was tight. What have you done? I haven't done anything. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I received a letter. You had Daniel Carter send legal notices? I asked him to follow Grandpa's instructions. Silence. Then, you don't understand. No. I answered calmly. I think for the first time in my life, I finally do. He lowered his voice. If you go through with this, I waited. You'll destroy the family. Those words hit me harder than I expected, because they were so familiar. Whenever something went wrong, it was somehow my responsibility to fix it. When Mom forgot birthdays, I smoothed things over. When Dad fought with suppliers, I apologized. When Vanessa quit another job, I encouraged her. I had spent decades carrying everyone else's mistakes. Not anymore. The family, I said quietly, was destroyed the day you decided I didn't deserve honesty. Then I ended the call. Marshall Hardware changed overnight. News travels fast in small towns. Legal notices travel even faster. Customers whispered in the aisles. Employees worried about their jobs. Suppliers demanded payment before shipping. Within 2 weeks, 4 more staff members resigned. Kevin was the last to leave. He showed up at my renovation site carrying his toolbox. "You hiring?" I smiled. "When can you start?" He grinned. "I was hoping you'd ask." One by one, others followed. Sarah, Mike, old Mr. Collins from Paint, who had postponed retirement twice because he loved helping customers. None of them came because I offered higher wages. I couldn't. They came because they trusted me. 2 months later, Harper Home and Hardware opened its doors. The name surprised everyone, especially me. People kept asking why I hadn't used Marshall. The answer was simple. Marshall had become a reminder of everything I'd lost. Harper had been my grandmother's maiden name. She'd been the kindest person I'd ever known. It felt right. At 6 in the morning, before opening day, I unlocked the front door. For the first time, the keys were mine. No one's permission. No promises. No waiting for someday. Mine. I stood there in the quiet store and cried. Not because I was sad, because I was finally home. The grand opening exceeded every expectation. By 8 o'clock, the parking lot was full. Frank Lawson was first through the door. "I'm keeping my promise," he said, placing a huge order on the counter. Mrs. Alvarez arrived carrying flowers. The mayor stopped by. Contractors lined up before sunrise. Some people admitted they'd driven past the old family store just to shop with me instead. One elderly man I'd known since childhood squeezed my shoulder. "You never sold hardware." I smiled. "What did I sell?" "Peace of mind." Across town, Marshall Hardware looked different. Half-empty parking lot. Discount banners hanging everywhere. Employees rushing between departments because there weren't enough people left. I didn't celebrate. I knew too many good memories lived inside those walls. I wanted accountability, not destruction. About a month later, Vanessa asked to meet again. This time, she looked different. Healthier. Calmer. She'd resigned. I couldn't keep pretending. We talked for nearly 2 hours. For the first time in years, we were simply sisters. No competition. No parents speaking through us. Just honesty. "I believe Dad," she admitted. "I thought he was protecting the future." I nodded. "I know." She looked at me. "I should have asked you first." "Yes." I was jealous. That surprised me. "Jealous? You always knew where you belonged." She smiled sadly. "I've spent my whole life trying to impress Dad." Suddenly, everything made sense. Neither of us had really been the favorite. We'd simply been used differently. A week later, Dad came to my store. Alone. He looked older. Smaller somehow. He stood awkwardly near the entrance until I walked over. "I need to tell you something." I waited. He looked around at the busy aisles. Customers laughing with employees. Contractors loading lumber. Children picking out birdhouses. Everything felt alive. I was afraid. Of what? His eyes filled with tears. That if I admitted the business belonged to you. He paused. Then I'd have to admit I'd stopped being the one who built it. The words hung between us. For the first time, he wasn't making excuses. He wasn't blaming Vanessa. Or Mom. Or me. He was telling the truth. I let my pride become more important than my daughter. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Not the quick, convenient apology people offer to end an argument. The kind that costs something. I believed him. That didn't erase 22 years. But it mattered. "I forgive you," I said quietly. His shoulders shook with relief. "But forgiveness," I continued, "doesn't mean things go back to the way they were." He nodded. "I know." The trust eventually reached a settlement. Rather than force the old store out immediately, I agreed to sell the property under fair market terms. Not because my father deserved special treatment. Because innocent employees didn't deserve to lose their jobs overnight. It was the last business decision I ever made for Marshall Hardware. After that, our lives finally separated. Today, if you drive through Brookhaven, you'll see 2 hardware stores. One is smaller than it used to be. The other is louder than it probably should be. Every Saturday morning, kids still get free popcorn. Contractors still drink terrible coffee before heading to job sites. Mrs. Alvarez still brings tamales every spring. Frank still complains our carts squeak. Some things never change. Above my office door hangs the framed plaque they packed into a cardboard box the day they threw me out. Thank you for 20 years of dedication. I kept it, not because it reminds me of what I lost, because it reminds me of something much more important. For 22 years, I believed loyalty meant sacrificing everything and asking for nothing. I was wrong. Real loyalty is earned. Real family tells you the truth. And real success isn't inheriting a business. It's building one that people choose every single day. Sometimes the greatest gift a family can give you is showing you exactly who they are. Because once they do, you're finally free to become who you were always meant to be.